Hey, we are starting another episode of Moderate Voices. Today we're going to be discussing I would consider it a philosophical question. It's probably more a modern history question. And it boils down to what we think America's purpose is. Or it's not necessarily what we think America's purpose is, what we think America thinks its purpose is. And right now, we kind of come up with four different options, and we're going to discuss why we came up with that and a little bit of a history. But first, I'm going to kind of let Chuck discuss what America has gone through. You know, Manifest Destiny. If you want to give any background, if you want to kind of give any history to this, or we can.
I don't remember my American history too terribly much, but there was a Manifest Destiny that happened when we did the Western expansion. That was the Manifest Destiny era. Prior to that was the Monroe Doctrine, I believe. And Manifest Destiny was basically kind of like, if you read history books, that was a big swath of time for the United States.
It was.
It was after the Civil War was over. We did Western expansion. Basically, that was Manifest Destiny was what we were dealing with all the way up to the World War I and World War II. You could kind of say like we were expanding. We were going to take on the world. That was what we were doing, and then the wars happened.
And that World War I, we intervened, and then after World War I, we went with the isolationist theory.
For a short period of time, yes.
We kind of withdrew back. We kind of got off the world stage, and then World War II happened.
I mean, because you had the Monroe Doctrine, which basically dictated what happened with World War I. Then we were attacked by Japan, so we were forced into World War II. And as a repercussion of you can look at the two wars together. You can look at I believe it was the Truman Doctrine, or basically Eisenhower's doctrine about, especially the Red Menace, dealing with communism. It was our job to not necessarily be a police thing, although that's what Jason's kind of phrases, which is kind of true. But it was our job to try to stop the Red Menace, stop the encroaching of communism, and to spread democracy.
At that time, I think you're right. It was stop the Red Menace, be a bastion of democracy versus the bastion of communism, so that we're not standing alone when the communists come for us. But because of how things have changed, I think that has kind of morphed into we're kind of the policemen of the world now.
Well, and that happened a little bit. You know, you can look at going through a little bit more history. You had like the '60s where we had the space race against the Soviets. You had more stuff in the '70s. Basically, we were in competition with the Soviet Union until the wall fell in '84 or '85 when the wall fell.
Now,
when the Cold War ended.
I want to pause, Chuck, here for a second, because discussing the space race, it was a space race. It was competition with the Russians. I remember that. But from what I remember from everything else, after we kind of got a man on the moon, I didn't really get the feel when it was coming on national television, when the people were talking about it, that we were doing it against the Russians anymore. It was we were exploring. We were explorers again.
Well, there was the competition with the Russians was what spurred it on. Then it was a matter of once we planted our flag on the moon. You can look at, for a while there was momentum. There was a lot of momentum that built up. There were more moon missions. I think there were, I forget how many there were exactly, of sending the moon. But as America tends to do, they got bored. Then we had the challenge when we had the space shuttle, where they were going to do the space shuttle things in the early '80s. That was still kind of the last remnant of the space race. And even then, we were kids at that time. It was cool, and it was part of our national identity that we were doing this kind of thing, but it wasn't as big of a deal.
It was losing its luster. I mean, back before everybody tuned in whenever there was a launch, when the Challenger...
You haven't seen it, but if you watch the recent movie Hidden Figures, which is the most exceptional movie, people want to watch it, I encourage you. It's very historically interesting. But there was a scene in it where, at that time, it was a story of basically putting John Glenn in space. And they showed a scene where everyone was standing outside. There was like an entire group of people just standing outside looking up while it was being launched. and they were nowhere near it. They were just hoping they could see something. That kind of level of excitement went away. And that's where, talking about the space race thing. Okay, but we need to move on a little bit.
Yeah,
Speeds up
go
here.
ahead and move on.
So you at the end of the Cold War. Then at the end of the Cold War, historically there was like a good, 10-ish years of the U.S. actually enjoying life, I guess you could say, because they lived under the threat of constant war. We were worried about the world ending. And
I called it the decade of decadence. And this wasn't the 80s was the decade of greed, but that was really the end of the Cold War, where we were outspending them to kind of basically defeat Russia economically. I'm not sure that really worked out well for us, but that's kind of how the history portrayed it. And then the 90s was everybody took a big breath, and everything kind
of. There was a big boost of just somewhat euphoria. We had the war in Iraq, the George H.W. Bush happened, and we won it soundly. And I remember watching that and feeling like the U.S. was just basically we were on top of the world for a few years there.
Because not only did we win it soundly, he won it, and then basically the world said, okay, we need to leave, and we left. There wasn't, whether or not it was the right exit strategy or not, there was an exit strategy. We got in, we got out.
I mean, but basically during that period of time, we were feeling really good about ourselves. The economy really did well. As Jason pointed out, the deficit went down. The country made money for a few years in a row, which hasn't happened since then, and hadn't happened prior to that for a really long time. And then, after the Clinton era, which he says there were some moral issues, and so they were still the country was doing really quite well. Then 9/11 happened. And 9/11, 2001, was a watershed moment for the country because basically what happened is it shocked us to realize that the rest of the world really did exist. I think for a while there, we just kind of ignored them. Not really ignored them, but just,
exploited them.
Yeah, we did. We did a lot of exploitation.
We exploited them and assumed that there would be no repercussions to it. Or let's rephrase that. Corporations exploited them.
We had eliminated the other superpower, and we didn't think we had to worry about anyone else in the world, that everybody else we were always going to be this. 9/11 happened. We were attacked on our soil. The fear happened, and now we're here where we're at now. Basically, the last 16 years have been dealing with that one incident as far as what our country is doing.
Well, emotionally, and I think we've also been dealing with the idea that we need to make sure that extremist groups don't exist anywhere in the world, because if they do, they will see America's top dog. And they will see us as top dog and think that they need to bloody our nose to show that they are a legitimate, resistance movement. So
during the period of happiness and our exploitation phase, a lot of them look at the United States as, well, clearly they don't like us, and some of their reasoning is actually somewhat justified. The level of which they have don't ever justify that. But so here we are now. We're now at this point. What do Jason and I kind of talked about this beforehand? We kind of think there's like the way we're currently on. So if you want to talk about the four things, Jason, I think I'll let you do that. You had a better way of phrasing than me.
Where we see our options as what, as a nation, we need to have as our identity. Right now, to some extent, our identity has been we are the world's policeman. I know Trump doesn't particularly care for that term, but it's like, what other term really applies? It's not really the best term, but it works. And I don't necessarily think that's what we should view ourselves going forward, but that's kind of where we've settled into. And while I disagree with it, I think that's perfectly acceptable, but as long as our diplomacy and everything else kind of embraces this national identity. That's option number one, world's policeman. Option number two of what we see as an option is we can try to become the explorers, the experimenters, the cutting-edge nation that we were in our youth. Back when we were creating forms of government that hadn't been seen since ancient Greece on scales that have never been seen, we were a young nation who were doing things that couldn't be done, but we refused to accept it. And the way I see this is we basically focus on exploration. we really can't explore much on Earth anymore, but there is a world of space. And that is a horrible turn of phrase. But there's a lot of space left for us to explore. There's entire worlds out there, and we could kind of see that as our identity. We're the explorers, the experimenters again. But to do that, in my opinion, we kind of have to draw back from being the world's policeman. Now, we still stay engaged, we still have a lot of trade, we still are a player on the world stage, but we're not, the only super. Basically, our military spending right now is 3 times the closest rival we have, which is China. And yes, China is trying to become a world power. That's a wonderful thing. I don't know if 3 times their spending, if we're getting all the bang for our buck. And then the third option is basically we completely kind of withdraw from the world, and we focus entirely on making America the best nation we can make America be. Not make America great again. No. America is great. Make America better for all classes of society. And that is a lot of investment in infrastructure, a lot of figuring out this health care for everybody kind of thing, getting everybody to have options and availability of education, work opportunities, and just kind of developing our nation. The fourth one, which we kind of don't necessarily think is an independent one, is go more corporate. Now, going more corporate can kind of be any of the other 3, but there's quite a few movies out there that kind of discuss the idea. We don't necessarily think this is a good way to go, but it might be. And right now, we're on the path of being a corporate policeman.
That's a good point. I think we talked about it before, and we kind of think, and most people, if you really analyze the situation, the country's not 100% ran by the large corporations, but other people can still get stuff done. It's just so hard now.
The barriers of entry, the large corporations, because they are so huge, are creating barriers of entry to the smaller players.
Yes.
And this is basically concentrating wealth, decision-making power, and resources and everything else into 10 or 50 corporations that are at top of the ladder. They are continuing to grow. Underneath them, the rest of the corporations, while they are growing, they are not growing at the same rate. You don't have the same level of innovation. You don't have the same everything else. And to me, to some extent, to go back to being that explorer, while I think corporations can be the explorer side of America, I think we need to have smaller corporations. Basically, and it comes down to this, in my opinion, there can never be a business too big to fail. And we are getting businesses that are too big to fail, and they are creating monopolies.
There's been a lot of work against backing up the laws against monopolies. There are laws against them for a reason. That's what happened at the turn of the century. Monopolies kind of came into being, and then people realized that was bad.
Well,
but now
the financial crisis of 2008, that was essentially 2 or 3 banks who had a monopoly on a financial sector, and they did something questionable. I'm not going to say it was wrong. If they were a smaller bank, it would have been perfectly acceptable. But you know what? They messed up. They were wrong. They should have gone bankrupt.
You've got a situation where, as far as America has seemed to embrace this corporate concept, and I think it comes out of everything else. America is a capitalistic country. It's like we have to accept that people like here feel that they're driven to make money.
So if we ignore the corporation aspect of it, whether we go more corporate or less corporate, that is separate. So that leaves us with 3 different national identities that we feel America could choose to accept. And right now, we're kind of, and our military budget embraces this idea, we are the world's policeman.
And also with our corporate structure, There's a lot of exploitation. Right now, there's a lot of money to be made in being policemen for those very large corporations. If we can try to change and pivot to one of the other options we mentioned, there is as much money to be made there.
I personally think there's more money to be made in the exploration, experimenting national identity, but there is also greater risk.
There's a lot more to invest. Anytime of this major change is an expensive change, and that's what really frightens and keeps people from willing to try these other paths than the one we're on, kind of as it is, because it seems so exorbitant. I mean, that's why NASA has had its budget cut for so many years in a row now. It's because but when you compare it to the amount of money we spend on defense, it's not. But we have chosen, and people make money on that. You know, we're spending as a country $687 billion a year on defense spending. Well, that's going towards 5 or 6 companies. So, you know, it's like there's not a lot of incentive right now for them. They're going to keep, well, they want things to be the way they are because they're making tons of money. So the country needs to embrace a different plan. And then the money will follow that if we can make it happen. It'll be difficult, but I think it could happen. I think Jason is currently trying to find out the number.
Expenditures, space.
I think it's somewhere around, it's in the millions, not anywhere near the billions, I think. So,
well, I gotta completely type in space exploration.
I mean, you just do NASA's budget, which covers a few other things than that, but.
Yeah, we could just do NASA's budget.
But, I mean, our thing here is, I think, Jason and I have talked about it, the country seems to be a bit adrift at the moment, a bit stagnant. You like to point that out with the two-party system, the way that you can't get anything done. And maybe part of that is we've just kind of just have yet to figure out what we think we should be. We're having a bit of a crisis, identity crisis, and the country as a whole, I think these are the choices we have. There may be some what we end up doing may be something completely different than what we talked about. But
because the list goes back to 1958, they have it listed in millions of dollars. So let's just round up completely. It's estimated, so this has been cut. Oh no, it hasn't been cut. So this is actually listed $20 billion. So $20 billion for space, $611 billion for national defense.
I mean, I don't think there's anyone. You know, we've talked about it. That's a lot of money to spend on defense. And the thing is, our current administration wants to spend 20% more.
54.
He wants to add
only 10% because it's $600 billion.
He wants to add 10%, but he doesn't. Yeah,
so about 10% more.
He wants to spend 10% more than we already are, and he said because we're being outspent.
Yes, we are, and he is correct. We are being outspent by the world.
Yes. Yes.
We make up 36% of the world's expenditure on military. So there is 64% of the world. We are being outspent by the world. But we're supposed to have allies.
Well, yeah. We'll see. Hopefully we maintain them.
If we can keep the allies, shouldn't we keep some of that on our side so we're not being outspent? But
of course, currently there's a lot of people making money on that, so you're going to have to give them.
It's the corporations that are making money, and this is where I start getting irritated with the Republican mindset. Well, military, we get what we pay for. No, you have as much waste and abuse in the military spending as you do in the public funding spending. So, if you're looking at, because every time you start talking about food programs, they always look to the waste and the abuse. Well, when we start talking about military expenditure, why aren't you looking at the waste and abuse there? Oh, because you like that expenditure. So
because you make money on it.
Use the same criteria, no matter what program you're putting forth. And we've gotten a little off topic. So, back to our three choices. I personally would prefer America go back to being the explorative, experimental, and I'm saying that word wrong, explorers.
Yeah, you said horribly. Yeah,
go back to be explorers and experimenters, and to some extent to be experimenters is to let states choose how they govern. And if states fail, such as Kansas seems to be doing, the other 49 states need to look at Kansas and go, well, that didn't work. Instead of, well, they didn't go hard enough or deep enough into that philosophy.
Well, I mean, that's, the discussing budget aspect is an interesting choice. Choosing, I think that's a good choice. I think that's a way that embraces the aspect that people like to say that is being American is being having an initiative and drive and striving for something. I wouldn't necessarily disagree. I would not mind. I think that's my top choice. My second choice would be somewhat withdraw back and concentrate on improving our society, improving our country, and in that process, we'll achieve some of the experimentation aspect. We need to try different things to try to make our country better, and we need to try them in a big way, not little ways. And I think we've kind of gotten away from.
Well, I mean, the last time we tried something in a big way was the ACA, and that was. I don't think it was a good law. I don't think it was well written. But I will give the Democrats this. At the time, they saw it as being broken, and for a majority of people, it was broken, and they tried to fix it. They didn't succeed, but at least they tried. But because they tried, they had to double down and admit to it that this is the way we go. And the Republicans then, for 8 years, said, no, it was a horrible idea, it was a horrible idea, until all of a sudden they have the power, and it's like, well, what's your opinion? Oh, maybe the ACA wasn't that bad.
Yeah. No, I mean, but that's that type of buying into, and that's the social aspect. That's the shrinking, pulling our budget back on the military spending to the point where we defend ourselves. That should be all we spend on, and then we take the rest of that money, the rest of that effort, the rest of that.
Well, it's not so much that we defend ourselves, we defend our allies, but we don't necessarily keep a standing force anywhere in the world saying, and we don't launch the airstrike into Syria. I realize that that's going to sit wrong with a lot of people, but if we're the world's policeman, that was an appropriate thing to do. If we're not the world's policeman, that was not an appropriate thing to do. And it comes down to national identity. So if you want to do that, if you thought that airstrike was the right thing to do, then you need to embrace this idea that we are the world's policeman as a national identity, and domestically certain things are going to suffer because of it.
Yeah, because we're going to concentrate a lot of our national attention and effort and a lot of our national budget on that process. And you get the situations we have with, where some domestic issues, quite a few actually, don't get the attention they deserve, or the money they deserve. So that's an interesting.
So we both agree that exploration is our number one choice. We think we need to go back to being exploration, which is withdrawing a little bit from the world, spending a little less on military budget. I personally think we should double our nearest competitor, which means we need to cut $200 billion, and let's just take $100 billion of that and just quit spending it, so we can reduce our deficit spending, and take the other $100 billion and actually invest in exploration, experimentation, and actually get this country going again in the national identity that we had for so long. My option number 2 is just embrace being police.
And I don't think I personally I see that. And I'm an interesting person. We've talked about this before. I have my opinion, but if the country really truly embraces something, all of these are not a bad thing. I think we need to embrace something.
Yeah,
we need to actually embrace something.
To some extent, that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation. I think we're floundering and we're kind of on the road of least resistance, which is what we've been doing for so long. I don't know if we're doing it now because we want to, or just, well, that's the way things have been done. Which in business is supposed to be a horrible thing to say. In education, it's probably a horrible thing to say too. Why do you do that?
Those things, if you read many of their great books or great works of art, in that sense, movies and stuff like that, there is one theme that holds out in a lot of those, and that's the just going with the flow is not the best choice after a while. You need to take control and do something.
Yes.
Whatever that thing is, embrace it and do it. I mean, you see it in all these different things. So we know that's what we should do. We're not sure, but just like anybody else, what do you do?
Yeah.
And we just need to pick one and go.
We both prefer to kind of withdraw from the world and do exploration and experimentation. Basically, let's get into space. Let's embrace that idea that that's what we're going to do. Not commercially, not let companies do it. Actually have the government drive it, and then let corporations
follow,
get in, help. If they get something up there going, yay. But have the country drive it. So, any final thoughts?
That's it.
Anything to wrap up? Any ideas?
No, I think we said all we needed to say this time. We've been at it a while. I'm pretty sure we're over time.
Not too bad. All right. Well, that ends this episode, and we'll see you guys later.
Later.